I worked a closing shift at a Mexican fast food restaurant for a little over 2 years. It was the kind of place that stayed open much later than most of the businesses around it. We served tacos, burritos, fried sides, and fountain drinks through a drive-thru that wrapped around the back of the building. Nothing about the job felt dangerous. Most nights were just exhausting. By midnight, the dining room was locked. The lobby lights were dimmed, and only the drive-thru remained open. Usually there were 3 adults working, one person taking orders, one preparing food, and a shift supervisor. The night this happened, I was working the drive-thru window. At around 1 in the morning, a car pulled up to the speaker. I heard the alert through my headset. I gave the standard greeting. Nobody answered. I waited a few seconds and repeated myself. Still nothing. The camera above the menu board was old, but a small monitor beside the register showed a grainy view of the vehicle. It was a dark sedan. The headlights were off. I could see someone sitting behind the wheel, but the image wasn't clear enough to make out a face. I asked one more time if they were ready to order. The car suddenly drove forward. I assumed the driver had changed their mind. A few seconds later, the sedan stopped beside my window. I kept the window closed. The driver didn't roll theirs down. They just sat there. I could see them more clearly now. It was an adult man. He was staring straight ahead with both hands resting on the steering wheel. I waited for him to look at me. He didn't. After maybe 30 seconds, I tapped lightly on the glass. His head turned toward me. Something about the movement made me uncomfortable. It was extremely slow, like he had been waiting for me to get his attention. I pointed toward the speaker behind him, trying to indicate that he hadn't placed an order. He stared at me for several seconds. Then he lifted one finger to his lips. He made a gesture telling me to be quiet. I stepped away from the window. The supervisor noticed my expression and came over. I told him what happened. He looked outside. The sedan was already moving. It passed the window, circled around the building, and disappeared behind the dumpster enclosure. We assumed he was leaving. About a minute later, my headset chimed again. The same car was back at the speaker. This time, the driver spoke immediately. He asked if I was still at the window. I didn't answer. The supervisor took the headset from me and asked what he wanted to order. The man repeated the question. Is the person from the window still here? The supervisor told him he needed to place an order or leave the property. There was a long silence. Then the man said, I just need to know when that person gets off. The supervisor told him we were contacting police. The car drove away. We locked the drive-thru window. For the next 20 minutes, nothing happened. A patrol car eventually drove through the parking lot. The officer spoke with us and checked behind the building. The sedan was gone. We gave him the description we had, which wasn't very useful. Dark sedan. Adult male driver. No plate number. The officer said he would patrol the area again later. We reopened the drive-thru. For the rest of the shift, I kept looking toward the window every time a car approached. Nothing unusual happened. At around 3, we closed. The supervisor offered to walk me to my car. I almost told him it wasn't necessary. I'm glad I didn't. Employee parking was behind the restaurant, near the dumpster enclosure. When we stepped outside, the supervisor stopped. My driver's door was slightly open. I knew I had locked it. We went back inside immediately and called police again. The same officer returned. He searched my car before allowing me near it. Nothing appeared stolen. There was no obvious damage to the lock, but something had been left on the driver's seat. It was one of her paper food wrappers. Someone had written on it with a black marker. There were only 4 words. I picked the wrong one. The officer asked whether I recognized the handwriting. I didn't. He checked the car and surrounding area. Then he asked the supervisor to show him our security footage. That's when things became worse. The exterior camera behind the restaurant showed the sedan arriving shortly before 1, but it hadn't entered from the main road. It had already been parked behind the neighboring building. The driver waited there until another employee left for the night. Then he moved his car into our drive-thru. After his second interaction with us, the sedan appeared to leave the property. But the camera covering the rear parking lot showed something else. The car stopped behind the dumpster enclosure. The driver's door opened. The man got out. Then the sedan rolled away. Someone else was driving. There had been 2 people in the car. The first man remained behind the restaurant. The camera showed him walking along the wall until he reached the employee parking area. He tried the handles of 3 vehicles. Mine was the 4th. The driver's door opened. I still don't know how. He leaned inside for several seconds. Then he closed the door almost completely. The officer rewound the footage. The man didn't return to the sedan. Instead, he walked toward the restaurant's rear service entrance. That door led directly into the kitchen. We all turned toward it. The supervisor checked the lock. It was secure. The officer continued watching the recording. The man reached the door and disappeared beneath the camera. He never appeared again. There was no footage of him walking away. The officer immediately requested another unit. They searched the entire restaurant. The bathrooms, the freezer, the walk-in refrigerator, the storage room, the ceiling access panels. Nothing. Then one of the officers noticed the employee trash area. Beside the rear service door was a large wheel container where we dumped flattened cardboard before taking it outside. It was almost empty, but inside were muddy shoe prints. Someone had been standing in it. The disturbing part was where the prints pointed, toward the kitchen. The officer checked the service door again. There was a narrow gap beneath it. Next to the threshold, he found a small piece of bent metal. He believed someone had tried manipulating the door from outside, but failed. That should have made me feel better. It didn't. Because while the officers were examining the door, one of my coworkers suddenly asked where the spare uniform was. We kept an extra shirt, hat, and apron hanging in the storage room for employees who spilled something on themselves. The shirt was gone. So was the hat. We checked the cameras inside the restaurant. At 1:17 in the morning, shortly after the strange customer drove away, a person appeared. At 1:17 in the morning, shortly after the strange customer drove away, a person appeared for less than 2 seconds at the edge of the kitchen camera. He was wearing our uniform. None of us remembered seeing him. The image only showed his back. He walked past the entrance to the storage room and disappeared behind a wall. The next camera should have recorded him entering the kitchen. It didn't. Police searched again. Eventually, they found a narrow maintenance space behind the beverage machine. It contained plumbing connections and electrical equipment. Employees almost never opened it because there was nothing we needed inside. The access panel wasn't fully closed. An officer opened it. The missing uniform shirt was inside. So was the hat. There was also a pair of work gloves and a small flashlight. The space was barely large enough for an adult to crouch inside. But someone had been there. Police believe the man had somehow entered the building earlier, possibly before the dining room closed. The entire drive-thru interaction may have been staged by the second person to keep our attention focused on the window. We reviewed more footage. At 11:42 that night, almost an hour before the sedan appeared, an adult man entered the dining room. He ordered a drink, then he walked toward the restroom hallway. There was no camera covering the hallway itself. We never found footage of him leaving. He had been inside the restaurant the entire time. The man at the drive-thru wasn't asking when I got off because he wanted the information for himself. He was asking for the person already hiding inside. Police never identified either man. I transferred to daytime shifts and quit a few months later. For a long time, I assumed I had simply been selected at random. Then, almost a year afterward, I ran into the former supervisor. He told me something management had never mentioned. 2 weeks before my incident, another employee had complained about a dark sedan following her after a closing shift. She was an adult woman who usually worked the same drive-thru position I did. She noticed the car behind her for several miles. When she turned into a well-lit gas station, it continued down the road. Management had treated it as a coincidence. The supervisor told me that was why the message in my car bothered him so much. I picked the wrong one. Maybe they thought I was her. Or maybe they were watching multiple employees. I'll never know. What I do know is that I spent most of that night afraid of the man sitting outside my drive-thru window. I watched his car. I watched the parking lot. I kept checking the darkness behind the building. I thought the danger was outside. But according to the security footage, while I was staring through that window, someone wearing our uniform was already standing behind me. I was 26 when I started working overnight maintenance at a Mexican fast food restaurant. It wasn't a glamorous job, but the hours worked for me. The restaurant closed its dining room at 11, stopped taking drive-thru orders at 2, and usually had everyone out of the building by 3 in the morning. My job started shortly before closing. I cleaned the dining room, emptied trash, scrubbed the kitchen floors, and handled anything the regular crew didn't have time to deal with. I cleaned the dining room, emptied trash, scrubbed the kitchen floors, and handled anything the regular crew didn't have time to deal with. Most nights were predictable. The only part I disliked was taking the trash outside. The dumpster enclosure was behind the restaurant, separated from the parking lot by a concrete wall. There was one security light above it, but it had been flickering for months. Management kept saying someone would repair it. No one ever did. One Tuesday night, I took the first load of trash outside around midnight. As I opened the dumpster, I noticed a backpack sitting on the ground behind it. It was plain black and looked fairly new. I assumed the customer had forgotten it. I didn't touch it. I went back inside and told the shift supervisor. He was an adult man in his 30s who had worked there for years. He came outside with me. The backpack was gone. He joked that someone had probably been digging through the dumpster and ran when they heard me. That explanation made sense. There were occasionally people looking for cans or discarded food. I forgot about it. At around 1:15, I went outside again. This time, there was no backpack. But I heard someone whisper. It came from behind the dumpster enclosure. I stopped. The restaurant's ventilation system made enough noise that I couldn't understand what was being said. I took a few steps closer. The whispering stopped. I called out and said the area was private property. No response. I walked around the concrete wall. Nobody was there. The ground behind the restaurant sloped down toward a drainage ditch filled with tall grass. I didn't go any farther. When I returned inside, I locked the rear service door. At 2, we stopped taking orders. There were 4 adults still working. The supervisor counted the registers while 2 employees cleaned the kitchen. I started collecting the final trash bags. That's when one of the kitchen employees asked me if I had moved her phone. She had left it charging in the break area. Now it was gone. Everyone looked around. It wasn't on the floor. It wasn't under a chair. She called it from the restaurant phone. We all became quiet. Her ringtone started playing outside, behind the building. We stared at one another. The supervisor told everyone to stay inside. We called police. While he was speaking with the dispatcher, the phone stopped ringing. A few seconds later, the employee received a text message on her smartwatch. It came from her own phone. The message said, "Wrong door." The supervisor checked the rear service entrance. Still locked. Then someone pulled on the outside handle. Once. Twice. Then harder. One of the kitchen employees screamed. The supervisor told the dispatcher someone was trying to enter. The pulling stopped. We backed away from the door. There was a small reinforced window near the top, but from where we stood, all we could see was darkness. About 30 seconds later, there was a knock. 3 slow knocks. Then a man's voice said, "Maintenance." Everyone looked at me. I was a maintenance employee. The supervisor shouted that police were coming. The man outside didn't answer. A patrol car arrived within a few minutes. 2 officers searched the parking lot, dumpster enclosure, and drainage ditch. They found the employee's phone lying in the grass. The screen had been cracked. They didn't find the man. One officer stayed while we finished closing. He suggested we all leave together. At around 3:15, we were finally ready. The officer walked outside first. He checked around each employee vehicle. Everything looked normal. We began leaving one at a time. I was the last employee besides the supervisor. My car was parked near the rear of the lot. As I approached it, I noticed something underneath the windshield wiper. It was a photograph. Not a printed picture. An instant photograph. It showed the back of the restaurant. The rear service door was centered in the image. I could see myself standing beside it with a trash bag. The photograph had been taken earlier that night, from somewhere near the drainage ditch. The officer looked at it, then immediately began searching again. This time, he found something. Behind the concrete dumpster wall was a small section where weeds had been flattened. There were food wrappers, empty water bottles, and cigarette butts. Someone had been spending time there. More importantly, there was a clear view of the rear service entrance. The officer found several more instant photographs partially hidden beneath a piece of cardboard. One showed the shift supervisor entering his car. Another showed the kitchen employee who owned the stolen phone walking toward a bus stop after a previous shift. Another showed a different employee unlocking the restaurant one morning. Then there were photographs of me, taking trash outside, arriving for work, sitting inside my car before a shift. One had been taken through my passenger side window while I was looking at my phone. I had no idea anyone was standing close enough to photograph me. Police collected everything. Management reviewed the outdoor camera footage. Most of the area behind the dumpster wasn't visible, but there was one strange detail. For several nights before the incident, the same adult man appeared on footage near closing. He never entered the restaurant. He would walk through the parking lot, disappear behind the dumpster enclosure, and never appear leaving. The police believed he was climbing down into the drainage ditch, which led underneath a nearby road and continued behind several businesses. That meant he would approach and leave without passing the main parking lot cameras. Management finally repaired the security light. They also installed additional cameras and required 2 employees to take trash outside together. For a few weeks, nothing happened. Then the restaurant received a complaint through its customer service system. The complaint claimed that an employee had been rude during the late night shift. It included my description. Management checked the date and time. I wasn't working that night. Security footage showed no customer matching the complaint. A week later, another complaint arrived. This one mentioned the kitchen employee whose phone had been stolen. It described the exact make and color of her vehicle. The customer claimed she had nearly hit him while leaving work. Again, there was no corresponding customer on camera. The complaints kept coming. They included information customers shouldn't have known. Which employees usually closed, who drove which car, who took trash outside, who used the rear entrance. The police suspected the person was trying to learn our full names through the complaint process. Management stopped responding to him. Then the messages changed. Instead of complaints, they became questions. What time does maintenance leave? Does the night supervisor always work Fridays? Why does the woman with the small car park near the dumpster now? The company blocked the account. Another account appeared. Then another. I quit shortly after that. I never saw the man clearly. Police never told me they identified him. Several months later, I returned to the area to pick up food from another restaurant. I drove past my old workplace. The dumpster enclosure had been rebuilt. There were bright lights everywhere. I almost laughed at how different it looked. Then I noticed something on the opposite side of the road. An adult man was standing near the entrance to the drainage ditch. He wasn't looking at the restaurant. He was looking at the employee parking lot. He had something small held in front of his face. At first, I thought it was a phone. Then the flash went off. I kept driving. I didn't stop to see what he was photographing. I didn't need to, because when I worked there, I spent weeks believing someone was trying to get inside the restaurant. Eventually, I understood that he wasn't. He really knew where we worked. He knew when we arrived. He knew when we left. He didn't need to get inside. He was waiting for us to come out. I worked at a Mexican fast food restaurant in a strip mall when I was 29. It was a smaller location with no drive-thru, so once the dining room closed, the entire restaurant was supposed to be empty except for employees. It was a smaller location with no drive-thru, so once the dining room closed, the entire restaurant was supposed to be empty except for employees. That usually happened around midnight. Most customers were gone well before then. The only people who stayed late were delivery drivers picking up online orders and occasionally someone finishing a meal in the dining room. The strangest thing about that restaurant was the pickup shelf. Online orders were placed on a metal rack near the front entrance. Each bag had a printed receipt attached to it. The receipt showed the customer's first name, what they ordered, and the time the order was placed. At the time, I never thought much about how much information was sitting there in plain view. That changed after one Friday night. It started with an order that nobody picked up. The name on the receipt was common enough that I didn't remember it. It was 2 burritos, chips, and a drink. The order was ready around 10:30. By 11, it was still sitting there. At 11:15, a man walked into the restaurant. He looked to be someone in his 30s. He wasn't wearing anything unusual. Dark jacket, jeans, baseball cap. He walked directly to the pickup shelf and looked at the bags. I asked if he needed help. He said he was checking for his order. He lifted 2 bags, read the receipts, then put them back. Finally, he pointed at the abandoned order. He asked if it had been sitting there long. I told him about 45 minutes. He smiled and said, "Then they're probably not coming." I told him we couldn't give away unclaimed food. He shrugged and walked out. I remember thinking it was strange, but not threatening. About 15 minutes later, a woman came in asking for that exact order. She was an adult, probably around my age. I apologized and handed it to her. She seemed nervous. Before leaving, she asked if anyone else had asked about her order. I told her a man had looked at it. Her expression changed immediately. She asked what he looked like. When I described him, she went pale. Then she looked through the front windows. She said she had been sitting in her car for almost an hour because the same man had been parked 2 spaces away from her. She had never seen him before. At first, she thought he was waiting for food. Then she noticed he kept looking toward her vehicle. She waited for him to leave. Eventually, his car disappeared. That's when she finally came inside. I told my shift supervisor. He asked if she wanted us to call police. She said no. She just wanted to leave. The supervisor walked her to her car. Nothing happened. We assumed that was the end of it. A few days later, another customer complained. This time, an adult man had ordered through the restaurant's mobile system. When he arrived, his food wasn't on the pickup shelf. We checked the order history. It had definitely been prepared. An employee remembered placing it on the rack. We assumed someone stole it. That happened occasionally. We remade the order for free. The customer left. About 20 minutes later, he called the restaurant. He sounded shaken. He asked whether one of our employees had followed him home. We told him no. He said a vehicle had followed him out of the parking lot. It stayed behind him through several turns. When he reached his neighborhood, the car kept following. He drove past his house instead of stopping. Eventually, the other vehicle turned away. The customer gave us a description. Dark vehicle. Adult male driver. Baseball cap. I thought about the man from the previous week. The supervisor contacted the store manager. The manager reviewed our cameras. Sure enough, about 5 minutes after the customer's food had been placed on the pickup shelf, the same man from the first incident entered. He didn't order anything. He picked up the customer's bag and walked out. At first, we assumed he wanted the food. Then the manager zoomed in on the footage. The man barely looked inside the bag. He spent most of his time reading the receipt. The receipt didn't contain the customer's address, but it did contain the customer's name. Management moved the pickup shelf behind the counter. After that, customers had to ask an employee for their food. We thought that would solve the problem. It didn't. The following Friday, I was working the register around 11:30 when someone came inside. It was the same man. I recognized him immediately. He stood near the entrance. I asked if he was picking up an order. He said no. He asked if the restroom was still open. I told him it was for customers only. He bought a fountain drink. Then he walked toward the restroom hallway. A few minutes passed. I forgot about him. We started closing the dining room. Chairs went onto tables. One employee swept. Another cleaned the drink station. Around midnight, I realized the man had never left. I checked the restroom. The door was unlocked. Nobody was inside. I told the supervisor. We checked the dining room. Empty. The hallway? Empty. The employee area? Empty. The rear exit was alarmed after 10 at night, and the alarm hadn't been triggered. The front camera showed the man entering. It never showed him leaving. The supervisor called police. While we waited, we searched again. There was a narrow storage closet near the restroom hallway. It held cleaning chemicals. extra paper towels, and a mop sink. The door was closed. I pulled it open. Nobody was inside. But something was wrong. Several boxes had been moved away from the back wall. Behind them was a small access panel. It led to plumbing pipes shared by the businesses in the strip mall. The panel was open. I had never seen it open before. The space beyond it wasn't large enough to stand in, but an adult could crawl through it. The supervisor ordered everyone to the front of the restaurant. Police arrived a few minutes later. 2 officers inspected the opening. They discovered that maintenance space continued behind the walls. It connected several businesses in the building. Most sections were blocked by pipes and support beams, but there was enough room for a person to crawl. The officers entered from another access point. They didn't find the man. What they did find was a backpack. Inside were bottled water, a flashlight, gloves, and dozens of folded restaurant receipts. Not just ours. Receipts from the coffee shop next door, the sandwich place farther down the strip, a nearby pharmacy, a gas station. Most had first names printed on them. Some had phone numbers. Several had handwritten notes, vehicle descriptions, arrival times, clothing, blue sedan, usually alone, leaves after 10, works nearby. One receipt was from our restaurant. It was mine. I had ordered food through the app during the shift several weeks earlier so I could use an employee discount. My name was printed at the top. Underneath it, someone had written, "Black car, parks near, last employee out sometimes." The police photographed everything. Then one officer asked where employees parked. Behind the building. The strip mall had a service road running along the rear. There were no customer entrances back there, only dumpsters, loading doors, utility boxes, and employee parking. The officer told us not to leave. More units searched the area. They found a folding chair behind the utility enclosure across from our rear door. From that position, someone had a clear view of every employee vehicle. There were cigarette butts on the ground, empty drink bottles, and another receipt. Mine again. This one was several months old. On the back, someone had written the days of the week. Next to Friday. Usually closes. Usually closes. I stopped working closing shifts after that. Management installed locks over the maintenance access panels and added cameras behind the building. For a while, nobody saw the man. Then one afternoon, an officer came to speak with the manager. Another business in the same strip mall had reported something, and an adult employee had found the man hiding above the ceiling tiles in a storage area. When confronted, he dropped into the hallway and ran through a rear emergency exit. Police searched but didn't catch him. The employee identified him from our security footage. Same jacket. Same cap. Same face. Investigators now believed he had been moving between businesses through utility spaces for months. Nobody knew exactly why. There was no evidence that he had physically hurt anyone. That was the detail management kept repeating. No one had been harmed. But I couldn't stop thinking about the receipts, the schedules, the vehicle descriptions, the fact that he had followed at least one customer home. I quit about 2 months later. For nearly a year, I heard nothing else. Then one evening, I ordered food online from a completely different restaurant. It wasn't the same chain. It wasn't even in the same part of town. I drove over after work. When I arrived, my order was sitting on a pickup shelf near the entrance. I grabbed it and returned to my car. As I started the engine, I noticed someone had parked several spaces away. Dark vehicle, headlights off. A man was sitting behind the wheel. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I could see the brim of a baseball cap. I didn't drive home. I went straight to a police station. The vehicle didn't follow me. Maybe it was a coincidence. I still tell myself that. But when I got home, I looked at the receipt attached to my food. My first name was printed across the top. And suddenly I understood why I haven't used my real name on a food order since.